It's Meet the Writers on BarnesandNoble.com. I'm Steve Bertrand. Charles Darwin and Abraham Lincoln, born on the same day 200 years ago. Adam Gopnik writes of them as two births that move the tide of time, two splashes that move the tide of time. He joins us. Adam, welcome.
Pleasure to be here.
You write in the book Angels and Ages, a short book about Darwin and Lincoln and modern life, that what mattered most is that they wrote so well. Explain that for me.
Both Darwin and Lincoln are supreme writers who we don't think of necessarily as writers because we think of them primarily, Lincoln is a man of action, Darwin is a man of science. But Lincoln became president because he wrote so well. He spoke speeches that he wrote himself. And then we remember him as president, not just for his acts, remarkable though they were, but for the way that he memorialized those acts in the most memorable rhetoric in American history. And Darwin, who we don't necessarily think of as a writer, made sure that all of his great books, his great and world-changing books, were published as popular literature. They weren't published as expert literature for expert audiences. They were published like books and memoirs and novels. On the Origin of Species, sold out on its first day of publication.
You write, too, that you can not read many scientists, but you still can read Darwin.
That's right. Even the great scientists of the early Enlightenment, Galileo or Isaac Newton, are really impenetrable to a non-specialist. Einstein, in its original form, is, of course, totally impenetrable to a non-specialist. But Darwin's On the Origin of Species, which is his specialist paper, it's not a popularization, is one of the most entertaining and enjoyable of all English books.
When it comes to Lincoln, it strikes me that he didn't leave very many words, but we're still not certain of the words he left.
Yes, that's one of the fascinating things about Lincoln, is that he's a little bit, you should forgive the expression, he's a little bit like a secular Jesus. He doesn't have a very long career in the public eye. Remember, it's only really 4 years that America knows him, as against Illinois knowing him. And his speeches tend to be quite short. The Gettysburg Address is famously short. And yet their significance is such, both because of the context in which they took place, but even more profoundly because of the extreme compression of his thought, that we still argue about precisely what he was saying. People still argue about whether he mentioned God, used the word God, at Gettysburg. We still ask ourselves how you should stress government of the people, by the people, for the people. Should it be government of the people, by the people, for the people, or government of the people, by the people, and so on? The words have incredible meaning in their very simplicity.
God was not on the text that he wrote, was not on the pieces of paper that he left, but there are people who were there who say they heard him say it.
That's right. And the question then we ask is, well, did they imagine they heard him say it, or did he stick it in? It doesn't appear in the text or the later text that he wrote.
I'm interested, too, in reading about the different accounts of the speech and how different reporters took something different from it. Even the Centralia newspaper, right?
That's
how did
right.
they start he wrote that he started the speech, what was it, 90
years ago? He said, none of this 70 years,
Right.
fancy stuff. They just made it 87 years ago,
Lincoln
or thereabouts.
said, right.
Yeah, Lincoln said.
If there's a word to describe Lincoln, you say it's shrewd. For Darwin, it's sensitive. Explain that for me.
I should say, the book isn't meant to be a sort of point-by-point comparison of the two men. It's more kind of meditation from afar about what they gave to us. But I also wanted to paint genuinely human portraits of these two men who can seem sometimes just to belong on a marble plinth in statuary form. And Lincoln was shrewd. He was shrewd in his judgment of people. He was shrewd in his manipulation of people. He was immensely shrewd as a lawyer in giving up 5 points to win one. And he was immensely shrewd as a commander-in-chief in sorting out the talent. Darwin was sensitive in that he was not only visually sensitive, he was not only sensitive to his environment, but he didn't like criticism, he didn't like combat. And one of the things that kept him from publishing his great idea for 20 years was, in plain English, his fear of getting a terribly negative reaction.
On Origin of Species was ready
That's
to
right.
be written for a couple of decades.
Long, complicated story, because 1838 he first comes up with the idea. He publishes in 1859, partly because someone else, Alfred Russel Wallace, has come up with the same idea, partly because Darwin doesn't yet have all the ammo he needs, and partly because his wife, Emma, whom he deeply loved, was a devoted Christian, and he was reluctant to shake her faith as he knew he would.
There is a lot of you in this book, too, I think. A lot of your ideas. You write about marriage. One of the things that stuck with me, that all successful marriages share lust, right?
Yes.
It was lust, laughter, and loyalty.
Yes.
Right? And these two men certainly shared that in their marriage.
Very cute of you. That was one of my favorite passages. I wanted this book to be a real departure from my previous book, so there's no first person in it, hardly at all.
But there is, isn't
except
there?
in some friends. But inevitably, I wrote it, so I am in it in the way an author is in his book. Yes, I think that's really true. I was thinking about it. Lincoln had an unhappy marriage in lots of ways. Mary, his wife, as we know, was extremely neurotic, and after the horror of his death, went something like crazy. Emma Darwin was a wonderful wife who shared an enormous amount with Charles. But yes, I do think that's true. I think my theory of marriage is that it has to be a formula of lust and laughter and loyalty. And the risk with marriages are that they become all loyalty. And my secret, if I may add, is that the only way to get back to the lust is through the laughter. You can't go right from loyalty back to lust.
What was striking to me was when you wrote about Darwin and his daughter Annie, and the observation, and you'll have to relay this, I don't remember verbatim, but the observation that a parent of a child of the opposite sex really comes to recognize the love for that child when he or she sees him or herself in that child.
That's right. You know, it's one of the kind of mystical experiences you get to have on Earth. You love all your children, and Darwin loved all of his children. But when you see a child of the opposite sex, whether it's a mother seeing a son or a father seeing a daughter, who belongs in some sense to another race of creatures, and yet has your mind and your capacities. And Annie, Darwin's daughter, his favorite daughter, was like him. She loved to read dictionaries. How many children like to do that? She had that kind of obsessive mind where she loved to read. It was exactly the kind of obsessive mind that he had. And it's clear that the intensity of love he felt for her came from that funny, she's exactly like me, and she's nothing like me at all, which fathers have for daughters.
And he lost her.
He lost her when she was 10 years old from one of those stupid wasting diseases of the Victorian era.
And from that, perhaps, he lost his religion. He became less religious through his life. Did Lincoln become more?
Lincoln became more. One of the things that fascinated me is you see two comets going in opposite directions in this story. Darwin became less religious as he got older, and Lincoln, who started off as a real cracker barrel atheist, you tell me where Adam and Eve came from, became more and more spiritually minded as his life went on, as he suffered the loss of his favorite son, Willie, and as above all, as he experienced the horror of the war.
You talk about Lincoln as the secular Jesus, and words matter, and Stanton's words matter, right? In the Peterson home, as Lincoln dies, and so now he belongs to the ages, or was it now he belongs to the angels? It's the different people who push the different word do it for very similar but different reasons.
Yeah, it's a dispute. It's a tiny little historical dispute, but it does have a large resonance because if you believe that Stanton said now he belongs to the ages, you believe that Lincoln belongs to history. If you believe that Stanton said now he belongs to the angels, you believe Lincoln belongs to heaven.
The difference in a vertical life or a horizontal life.
Exactly. Do you think of our lives as being essentially something where we look forward to future generations or where we look up for the blessing of heaven?
In the end, you're right. It's not what they had in common that's important. It's what they have in common with us.
Yes.
What is their impact on us now?
That's the crucial thing that this book is about. It's a meditation on our minds, not on the parallels of their lives. We share with them, we inherit from them, really, several things. We inherit from them a faith in the eloquence of argument. We believe in the eloquence of explanation. We like to see complicated ideas explained. We're skeptical of authority. I mean, in gross. That's what makes modern people different from pre-modern people. And we have to live with the simultaneous knowledge that our lives are little sparrow shots, little hummingbird heartbeats in this vast expanse of time. And yet, somehow, they must mean something. Somehow, if we give our life for our country, that must have value. Somehow, if we see a child sicken, that must have meaning. That's the tragic side of modernity that they experienced and left to us as a legacy.
Adam Gopnik, it was nice to see you again.
Pleasure to be here.
I'm Steve Bertrand. This is Meet the Writers on BarnesandNoble.com.